Capitalist Realism is a 2009 work of Marxist theory by Mark Fisher. Fisher was born in Leicester in 1968. He gained a BA in philosophy and English in 1989 and a PhD a decade later. He taught at a further education college whilst running an influential blog called K-Punk, and he eventually became a visiting lecturer at Goldsmiths College London. But he'd long suffered severe bouts of mental ill health, and in 2017, he took his own life. Capitalist realism is usually considered his best work. The term capitalist realism refers to what Fisher claims is the prevailing conviction in our society, that given the kind of creatures human beings are, and specifically the kind of limitations we exhibit, capitalism is the only realistically possible economic system. The task he sets himself of challenging that conviction is exacerbated by the fact that present-day capitalism is powerful enough to co-opt many forms of anti-capitalism. The book contains 9 titled chapters, the first theme setting. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, a phrase Fisher attributes to the 2 still living thinkers whose influence looms largest here, the Slovenian Slavoj Žižek and the American cultural critic Frederick Jameson. At one point, Fisher even says, "What I'm calling capitalist realism could be subsumed under the rubric of postmodernism as defined by Jameson." Tariq Goddard's Afterword to the text sets it in its biographical context. Fisher intended capitalist realism as a stepping stone to a canonical book of theory. It was compiled from material he'd already assembled, much of it only obliquely relevant to a grand historical narrative, and when the then owner of the publishing firm read Fisher's manuscript, he was apoplectic, raging that it was too personal and British ever to sell in the United States. As Fisher's mental health worsened, Goddard says, it may have become obvious to him that the great system-building text was never going to be written, and that his small book, Capitalist Realism, would be what we were left with in its place. Capitalist realism describes the depressed social-cultural landscape of Britain in the noughties. Capitalism is blamed, but it's not defined, and the precise mechanisms it uses to produce its effects are never specified. A skeptic might ascribe Fisher's findings to human nature. Relative to past ages, capitalism has made many of us much wealthier, and we're mostly suffering from affluenza, especially the middle classes. There's not much in here to gainsay such a contrary reading. Fisher uses films and popular music to support his observations, and he seems to think we've lost the power to produce anything genuinely new, which is always a risky assessment. The new doesn't usually appear as such, except with the benefit of hindsight. However, he's incredibly good on the 2 subjects closest to his heart, bureaucracy and mental health. His discussion of capitalist bureaucracy, market Stalinism he calls it, draws on Kafka and Deleuze and Guattari, but mostly on his own experience in further education. He describes the endless target setting, the performance reviews, the surveillance, in short, the marketization of education, which he thinks rests on a confusion as to whether students are consumers or product. Occasionally, he's funny. In the context of a discussion about how such a system requires an institutional amnesia, he recalls a middle manager of his acquaintance who asserted with full confidence a story about the college and its future one day, then literally the next day would happily propound a story that directly contradicted what he'd just said. There was never a question of his repudiating the previous story. It was as if he only dimly remembered there ever being one. As for mental health, he thinks we've medicalized and individualized it in order to conceal its social dimension. In some ways, that claim is even less contentious today than it was when capitalist realism first appeared in 2009. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product, is an old truism. And since it's widely thought nowadays that many mental health problems are traceable to social media, there's an uncontroversial connection to capitalism. It's impossible to read this book without wondering what the longer theoretical work Fisher had in mind might have looked like. I have my own ideas about that, but that's for another day.